The cafeteria line at Naval Base Coronado stretched longer than usual that Tuesday morning, a serpentine queue of sailors, contractors, and support staff shuffling toward trays of scrambled eggs and toast. Commander Natalia Kincaid stood third from the front, her frame compact at 5'5", wearing civilian clothes, faded jeans, and a gray sweatshirt with no insignia, no rank, nothing to announce the weight she carried. Her dark hair was pulled into a simple ponytail, and her hands rested casually in her pockets. To anyone watching, she looked like administrative staff, maybe a logistics coordinator grabbing breakfast before a long shift pushing paperwork. The Marine corporal who shoved past her didn't even glance down. He was broad-shouldered, fresh-faced, probably 23, wearing his dress blues like armor. His buddies followed, cutting the line with the swagger of men who believed their presence commanded automatic deference. One of them laughed, a sharp bark that echoed across the tile floor. The corporal planted himself directly in front of Natalia, his back to her, already reaching for a tray. She didn't move, didn't speak. Her expression remained neutral, almost serene, as the Marines jostled for position, their voices loud and careless. A petty officer 2 spots behind her shifted uncomfortably, recognizing something in Natalia's stillness that the Marines clearly didn't. The line shuffled forward. The corporal grabbed his tray, still oblivious. His friend turned, finally noticing Natalia, and smirked. "Sorry, ma'am," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Didn't see you there. Maybe stand a little taller next time." The others snickered. Natalia's gaze didn't shift. She simply waited, her breathing even, her posture unchanged. The petty officer behind her swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the exit as if calculating whether he should intervene or disappear. Then the cafeteria doors opened and Captain Vincent Harrow walked in. He was tall, graying at the temples, his uniform immaculate. He scanned the room with the efficiency of someone accustomed to reading chaos, and his eyes locked onto the scene unfolding at the food line. His stride faltered for half a second, then quickened. The corporal was still laughing when Harrow's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Corporal." The Marine turned, grinning, expecting camaraderie. Instead, he found Harrow's expression carved from stone. "Step aside," Harrow said quietly. The corporal blinked, confusion flickering across his face. "Sir, I said step aside." Harrow's voice didn't rise, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The Marine hesitated, then moved, his buddies following with uncertain glances. Harrow walked directly to Natalia, and when he stopped, he snapped to attention and saluted. "Commander Kincaid," he said, his voice carrying across the cafeteria. Every head turned. Every conversation died. Natalia returned the salute with the kind of precision that spoke of decades, not years. "At ease, Captain," she said softly. The corporal's face had gone pale. Harrow didn't look at him. He kept his focus on Natalia, his respect palpable. "Ma'am, I apologize for the disruption." She shook her head once. "No disruption, Captain, just breakfast." But Harrow wasn't finished. He turned to face the Marines, and his voice carried the weight of command. "Do any of you know who you just disrespected?" Silence. The corporal's mouth opened, then closed. Harrow continued, his tone measured but edged with steel. "That is Commander Natalia Kincaid, call sign Reaper. Former FA-18 Super Hornet pilot, 217 combat missions, Navy Cross recipient, and as of 6 months ago the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Development Group." The words landed like bombs. DVGRU. The unit most people knew by another name, SEAL Team 6. The corporal looked like he might be sick. Natalia picked up a tray, her movements calm, unhurried. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice quiet but clear, the lines moving. She walked past them without another glance, and the cafeteria remained frozen in silence. Harrow followed her, his jaw tight. Behind them, the Marines stood rooted in place, their earlier bravado dissolved into humiliation. The petty officer who'd been watching finally exhaled, shaking his head in disbelief. Across the room, a senior chief muttered to his table mate, "That's Reaper." His companion nodded slowly. "That's Reaper." Natalia sat at a corner table alone and began eating her eggs as if nothing had happened. Harrow joined her, setting down his own tray. "You could have said something," he he offered quietly. She shook her head. They didn't need to know. They do now, she glanced up, her gray eyes steady. They'll forget by tomorrow. But Harrow knew better. In a place like Coronado, stories traveled faster than sound. By lunch, everyone on base would know. By dinner, the story would reach the fleet. And in the days to come, people would start asking the question that mattered most. Who exactly was Commander Natalia Kincaid? And how did someone who looked like she belonged behind a desk end up commanding the most elite fighting force in the world? The answer, as Harrow knew, was buried in sand, smoke, and years of missions that never made the news. It started in Fallon, Nevada, 2 decades earlier, when Natalia was a lieutenant fresh out of flight school, her call sign still unearned, her reputation non-existent. She'd been assigned to Strike Fighter Squadron 41, the Black Aces, flying the FA-18C Hornet in an era when female combat pilots were still a novelty and skepticism was the default response. Her first briefing had been a gauntlet. The squadron's executive officer, a commander named Voss, had looked her up and down with thinly veiled disdain and said, "You're small. Can you even reach the stick?" The room had gone quiet. Natalia had met his gaze without flinching. "I can reach everything that matters, sir." It wasn't bravado, it was fact. But facts didn't stop the whispers, the double checks on her pre-flight procedures, the way her fellow pilots questioned her calls during training runs. She flew flawlessly and they called it luck. She executed textbook maneuvers and they called it rote memorization. She outturned a senior lieutenant in a dogfight simulation and he claimed his instruments had malfunctioned. Natalia didn't argue. She just flew. Her first combat deployment came 8 months later, aboard the USS Carl Vinson during operations over Afghanistan. The mission briefs were straightforward close air support for ground units, precision strikes on Taliban positions, reconnaissance along the Pakistani border. Natalia flew every sortie with the same meticulous preparation, the same calm focus. And slowly, grudgingly, her squadron began to notice. She didn't showboat. She didn't take unnecessary risks. But when the calls came in, when troops on the ground were pinned down and needed ordnance on target, Natalia delivered. Every time, without hesitation. It was on her 19th mission that she earned her call sign. A Marine company had been ambushed in the Korangal Valley, trapped in a narrow canyon with insurgents firing from elevated positions. The forward air controller's voice had been ragged with desperation. "Station, this is Outlaw 26. We're taking effective fire from multiple positions, requesting immediate air support, over." Natalia had been 30 miles out, returning from a patrol. She banked hard, punching the throttle, her Hornet screaming through the mountain passes at 400 knots. Her wingman, Lieutenant Ruiz, tried to keep pace. "Reaper lead, we're low on fuel," he'd called. She'd already done the math. "Stay high, Ruiz, I'll make the run." "Natalia, we don't have clearance, I'll get it." She didn't wait for approval. She dove into the canyon, the rock walls blurring past her canopy, her heads-up display painting targets in red. The insurgent positions were dug into the ridgeline, nearly invisible against the terrain. Natalia didn't hesitate. She pickled off 2 500-pound JDAMs, the bombs separating cleanly, their guidance fins adjusting mid-flight. The explosions tore through the ridge, and the enemy fire ceased instantly. Outlaw 26's voice came back, breathless with relief. "Reaper lead, that's a direct hit. You just saved our lives, over." Ruiz had been silent on the radio for a long moment. Then quietly he'd said, "They're calling you Reaper now." The name stuck. Not because she killed without thought, but because when death was necessary, she delivered it with absolute precision. No wasted movement, no hesitation. Just the certainty that when Natalia Kincaid was overhead, the people below would survive. By the end of that deployment, her reputation had shifted. The skepticism didn't vanish entirely, but it was tempered by results. She wasn't just good. She was reliable. And in combat, reliability mattered more than bravado. 3 years later, Natalia was a lieutenant commander flying the FA-18E Super Hornet, the larger, more powerful variant of the jet she'd cut her teeth on. Her squadron had been reassigned to the USS George H.W. Bush, supporting operations in Iraq during the rise of ISIS. The missions were longer, the targets more complex, and the stakes higher. Natalia flew strike packages into Mosul, Ramadi, and Tikrit, hitting command centers, weapons depots, and vehicle convoys. She'd learned to read the battlefield from 30,000 feet, to distinguish between a civilian truck and a technical mounting a heavy machine gun, to make life-and-death decisions in fractions of a second. Her call sign had become legend. Pilots in other squadrons knew the name. Ground commanders requested her specifically. "Get me Reaper," they'd say, and the air wing would scramble to put her overhead. But it wasn't just her skill that set her apart. It was the way she carried herself. Calm. Unshakable, even when everything was falling apart. It was during a mission over Fallujah that she proved it beyond any doubt. The tasking order had been straightforward: destroy a high-value target, a senior ISIS commander hiding in a compound on the city's outskirts. Natalia had been leading a 4-ship strike package, coordinating with an AC-130 gunship and a Reaper drone for overwatch. The ingress had been smooth, the weather clear, the target coordinates confirmed. She'd armed her GBU-38s, locked the coordinates, and was seconds from weapons release when the drone operator's voice cut through the radio. "Reaper lead, hold fire, hold fire. We have civilians in the compound, repeat, civilians in the compound." Natalia's finger hovered over the release. She glanced at her targeting pod feed, the infrared imagery showing heat signatures clustered inside the building. Women, children. The commander was there too, but he wasn't alone. Her wingman, Lieutenant Pacheco, called out, "Reaper lead, we're weapons hot, awaiting your call." The AC-130 pilot chimed in. "We can put a 105 round through the roof, minimize collateral." Natalia's mind worked through the variables. A precision strike might work, but the blast radius in an urban environment was unpredictable. The civilians were too close. She made the call. "Negative all stations. We're aborting." Pacheco's voice was incredulous. "Aborting? Natalia, we've got clearance. The target is confirmed." "I said abort. Break off and return to holding." The AC-130 pilot didn't question her. The drone operator didn't either. They'd worked with Reaper before. They trusted her judgment. Pacheco didn't. "This is a mistake," he muttered, but he followed her lead. The strike package climbed back to altitude, orbiting 5 miles out while Natalia coordinated with the ground commander. "Outlaw 6, Reaper lead, target area is not clear. Recommend ground assault for precision capture, over." The commander's response was clipped. "Reaper, we don't have assets in position. This is your shot." "Not with civilians in the blast zone, sir." There was a long pause. Then reluctantly, "Copy, Reaper. Stand by." 3 hours later, a SEAL team moved in, extracted the civilians, and captured the commander alive. The intelligence they pulled from him led to the dismantling of an entire ISIS cell. Natalia's decision had saved lives and yielded results far beyond what a bomb could have achieved. The next morning, Pacheco found her in the ready room. He didn't apologize, but his tone had changed. "You made the right call," he said quietly. She nodded. "I know." That mission became a case study at Top Gun, a lesson in judgment under pressure. But for Natalia, it was just another day, another choice, another step in a career built on doing the job right, even when it was hard. Her promotions came steadily: commander at 35, captain at 40. She'd commanded a squadron, then a carrier air wing, earning a reputation as someone who led from the front and never asked her pilots to do anything she wouldn't do herself. And then 2 years ago, something unexpected happened. Naval Special Warfare Command came calling. DVGRU was looking for a new commanding officer, someone with combat experience, tactical brilliance, and the ability to lead the most elite operators in the world. The selection process was brutal: interviews with admirals, psychological evaluations, scenario-based assessments. Natalia had been skeptical. "I'm a pilot," she told the selection board. "I don't know anything about running a SEAL team." The board chairman, a vice admiral named Caldwell, had smiled. "You know how to lead under fire, you know how to make hard calls, and you know how to earn respect. That's what we need." 6 months later, she took command. The SEALs had been wary at first. She wasn't one of them. She hadn't been through Bud S. She didn't have a trident. But Natalia didn't try to be something she wasn't. She learned their language, their culture, their way of thinking. She sat through mission briefs, studied their tactics, and asked questions that showed she cared about getting it right. Slowly, the wariness faded. They saw the same thing the pilots had seen years ago. She was competent, she was reliable, and when it mattered, she made the right call. Now, sitting in the Coronado cafeteria with Captain Harrow, Natalia finished her eggs and set down her fork. The corporal who'd shoved her was still standing near the food line, his face pale, his friend silent. Harrow glanced over. "You going to say something to him?" Natalia shook her head. "He'll figure it out. And if he doesn't," she stood, picking up her tray, "then someone else will teach him." She walked toward the exit, and as she passed the Marines, the corporal finally found his voice. "Ma'am, I didn't know, I'm sorry." Natalia stopped. She turned to face him, and her expression was calm, almost kind. "You didn't know because you didn't look. Next time, look." She left him standing there, and the cafeteria remained silent long after she was gone. By midday, the story had spread across Coronado like wildfire. In the SEAL Team 6 compound, operators gathered in clusters, murmuring about the commander who'd been disrespected in the chow line and hadn't said a word. In the hangar bays, maintainers swapped tales of Reaper's combat record, each story more impressive than the last. In the officers' club, senior leaders debated whether the incident would help or hurt her command. Captain Harrow knew the answer. It would help. Because Natalia hadn't demanded respect. She'd simply existed, and when the moment came, she'd let her record speak for itself. That was leadership. Not the loud kind that demanded attention, but the quiet kind that earned it. And as the sun set over the Pacific, Natalia Kincaid sat in her office, reviewing mission plans for an upcoming operation in the Horn of Africa, her mind already focused on the next challenge. The cafeteria was forgotten. The Marines were forgotten. All that mattered was the mission, because that's who Reaper was, not the rank, not the call sign, just the work. The operation in the Horn of Africa launched 2 weeks later, a joint task force mission targeting a high-value extremist network operating along the Somali coast. Natalia coordinated from the command center aboard the USS Bataan, an amphibious assault ship serving as the floating headquarters for the mission. The SEAL platoons under her command moved with surgical precision, hitting 3 targets simultaneously: a weapons cache in Mogadishu, a training camp outside Kismayo, and a safe house in Basaso. The raids went flawlessly. 0 casualties, 13 enemy combatants captured, a treasure trove of intelligence recovered. When the after-action report reached Naval Special Warfare Command, the Vice Admiral called personally to congratulate her. "Outstanding work, Commander. Your team executed perfectly." Natalia's response was characteristically modest. "They always do, sir. I just point them in the right direction." But the truth was more complex. She'd spent weeks studying the terrain, coordinating with intelligence assets, refining the mission parameters until every variable was accounted for. She'd sat with each platoon leader, asking questions, offering suggestions, making sure they had everything they needed. And when the operation kicked off, she'd monitored every radio transmission, ready to make adjustments if things went sideways. They hadn't, because she'd done the work. Back at Coronado, the SEALs started calling her the conductor. Not to her face, but in the spaces between missions, in the quiet conversations where respect was measured in nicknames. She orchestrated operations the way a maestro led a symphony, every element in harmony, every section playing its part. It was a compliment of the highest order, and Natalia would have been embarrassed if she'd known. But she didn't. She was too focused on the next mission, the next briefing, the next call that would send her teams into harm's way. Her days began at 0500 with a 5-mile run along the beach, her pace steady, her breathing controlled. She ran alone, preferring the solitude, the rhythm of her feet on sand, the crash of waves as a metronome. By 0630, she was in the compound, reviewing overnight intelligence reports, checking in with platoon leaders, ensuring her teams had what they needed. Meetings filled her mornings: coordination calls with JSOC, briefings with intelligence analysts, planning sessions for upcoming operations. Lunch was usually a protein bar eaten at her desk. Afternoons were spent in training areas, watching her SEALs run drills, offering observations, asking questions that made them think harder about their tactics. Never micromanaged, never second-guessed in the moment, but she paid attention and the operators noticed. "She sees everything," one senior chief told his platoon. "Don't slack off, she'll catch it." It wasn't about discipline. It was about standard. Natalia expected excellence because she'd lived it and she knew her teams were capable of it. Most evenings she stayed late, reading mission reports, studying satellite imagery, preparing for the inevitable next crisis. Her personal life was sparse. No spouse, no children, a few close friends scattered across the fleet, relationships maintained through occasional emails and rare phone calls. Her apartment in San Diego was functional, not homey. A bed, a desk, a couch, bookshelves filled with military history and tactical manuals. The walls were bare except for a single photograph, a black and white image of her father in his Navy dress whites, taken the day he made Chief Petty Officer. He'd been a helicopter mechanic, a man who'd spent 30 years keeping aircraft flying, never seeking glory, just doing the job. Natalia had inherited his work ethic, his humility, his belief that the mission mattered more than the recognition. He'd died of cancer when she was at the Naval Academy, and she'd carried his memory into every cockpit, every briefing room, every decision that defined her career. The photograph was the only personal item she kept visible, a reminder of where she came from and why she served. 3 months into her command, a crisis erupted in the Mediterranean. A cargo ship had been hijacked off the coast of Libya, its crew taken hostage by a militant group with ties to al-Qaeda. The State Department wanted a rescue. The Pentagon wanted it done quietly. DVGRU got the call. Natalia assembled her best platoon, a 16-man unit led by Senior Chief Warrant Officer Elias Rourke, a 20-year veteran with more combat deployments than most people had birthdays. Rourke was blunt, experienced, and initially skeptical of Natalia's leadership. But he was professional, and he followed orders. The mission brief took place in a secured compartment aboard the USS Iwo Jima, a helicopter carrier positioned in international waters near the Libyan coast. Natalia stood at the front of the room, a detailed map of the hijacked ship projected on the wall behind her. "The vessel is a Panamanian-flagged freighter, currently anchored 12 miles off Tripoli," she began, her voice calm and measured. 14 hostages, all civilian crew. The hijackers number between 8 and 12, armed with small arms and possibly RPGs. "Our objective is simple: rescue the hostages, neutralize the threats, and get out clean." Rourke leaned forward, studying the ship's layout. "Access points. 3 viable options," Natalia replied, using a laser pointer to highlight sections of the hull. "Fast rope onto the deck from helos, approach via RHIBs and climb the hull, or submerge and breach through the engine room. Your call, Chief." It was a test, and Rourke knew it. She was giving him tactical control, trusting his expertise. He appreciated that. "We'll use RHIBs," he said. "Fast rope puts us too exposed. Submerging takes too long. We hit the hull, climb fast, and sweep deck to bridge." Natalia nodded. "Timing. 0200, minimal moonlight, guards will be tired." "Agreed. What do you need from me?" Rourke met her gaze. "Eyes in the sky, real-time intel, and if things go sideways, extraction options." "You'll have all 3. She meant it, and Rourke could tell. The briefing continued for another hour, every detail scrutinized, every contingency planned. When it ended, Rourke lingered as the others filed out. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you've done this before." Natalia raised an eyebrow. "Hostage rescue. Trusted the operators to do their job." She smiled faintly. "I fly jets, Chief. I don't pretend to know how to kick doors, but I do know how to support the people who do." Rourke nodded slowly. "Appreciated, ma'am." The operation launched at 0130. 2 MH-60 Seahawks lifted off the Iwo Jima's deck, their rotors cutting through the night, carrying the SEAL platoon toward the target. Natalia monitored from the command center, surrounded by screens displaying drone feeds, radio channels, and satellite imagery. The SEALs reached the freighter at 0200, their RHIBs cutting silently through the water, their movements precise. They climbed the hull in under 90 seconds, their suppressed weapons ready. Rourke's voice came through the radio, calm and controlled. "Touchdown. Moving to sweep." Natalia watched the drone feed, the infrared imagery showing the SEALs moving like shadows across the deck. They encountered the first hostile near the starboard railing, a lone sentry, quickly neutralized with a suppressed headshot. The team split into two elements, one heading for the bridge, the other clearing the crew quarters. It was textbook, until it wasn't. A hijacker emerged from a hatch near the engine room, firing wildly with an AK-47. The SEALs returned fire, dropping him instantly, but the noise had alerted the others. Suddenly the ship was alive with movement, hostiles scrambling, shouts echoing across the deck. Rourke's voice was tight but controlled. "Contact multiple hostiles, crew quarters." Natalia's pulse remained steady. "Chief, the drone shows 3 hostiles moving toward your position from the stern. Recommend you hold and let them come to you." "Copy." She watched the SEALs take cover, their discipline holding even as the situation escalated. The hostiles advanced, unaware they were walking into a kill box. Rourke gave the signal and his team opened up, precise bursts dropping all 3 targets in seconds. "Clear," Rourke reported. "Moving to bridge." The assault continued room by room, the SEALs methodical and relentless. By 02:15, all hostiles were neutralized and the crew was secured. Rourke's voice came through, relief evident. "Jackpot. 14 hostages recovered, all alive. No friendly casualties." Natalia allowed herself a small exhale. "Outstanding work, Chief. Extraction inbound." The Seahawks returned, lifting the hostages and the platoon off the freighter and back to the Iwo Jima. By 0300, the operation was complete. In the command center, Natalia debriefed the team, asking questions, nodding lessons learned, praising their execution. Rourke approached her afterward, his expression serious. "Ma'am, that call you made about holding position and letting the hostiles come to us, that saved lives." She nodded. "You would have figured it out." "Maybe, but you saw it first." It was the moment the skepticism died. Rourke and his platoon had entered the mission uncertain about their commander. They left it knowing they could trust her. Word spread quickly through DEVGRU. Reaper wasn't just a pilot who'd been given a command. She was a leader who understood the fight. The months that followed solidified her reputation. She led planning for operations in Yemen, Syria, and the Philippines, each mission executed with precision. She advocated for her teams, securing better equipment, more training time, additional support assets. She fought bureaucratic battles with the same intensity she'd flown combat missions, and she won more often than she lost. But she also remembered the small things. When a SEAL's wife went into labor during a deployment, Natalia personally arranged for him to video call from the ship. When a young operator struggled with PTSD after a difficult mission, she connected him with resources and checked in regularly. She led with competence, but she cared with humanity. And the SEALs noticed. By the time the Coronado cafeteria incident became a distant memory, Natalia had earned something far more valuable than respect. She'd earned trust. The kind of trust that meant when the next crisis came, when the next impossible mission landed on her desk, her teams would follow her without hesitation. That crisis came on a Tuesday in late August. A flash message from JSOC marked immediate action required. An American aid worker had been kidnapped by militants in eastern Afghanistan, dragged into a remote mountain compound near the Pakistani border. The window for rescue was narrow. Intelligence suggested the hostage would be moved within 48 hours, likely across the border where extraction would be impossible. DEVGRU was tasked. Natalia read the briefing in her office, her eyes scanning the intelligence assessments, the terrain analysis, the threat matrix. The compound was isolated, perched on a ridgeline at 8,000 feet, surrounded by narrow valleys and steep cliffs. Access was limited to a single dirt road, easily defended. Air support would be complicated by the altitude and the proximity to Pakistani airspace. It was, by any measure, a nightmare scenario. She called Rourke into her office and handed him the file. He read in silence, his jaw tightening. "This is tight," he said finally. "Very tight," Natalia nodded. "What do you need?" "More time for planning, better imagery, and a backup plan if the hellos can't make it in." "You'll have all 3. Get your team spun up. We brief in 6 hours." Rourke left and Natalia turned to her computer, pulling up satellite imagery and drafting tasking requests for additional reconnaissance. She worked through the night, coordinating with intelligence assets, refining the mission profile, preparing options. The brief took place in the DEVGRU compound secure conference room, the walls lined with maps and mission boards. Rourke's platoon sat at the table, their faces serious, their focus absolute. Natalia stood at the front, a detailed 3D rendering of the compound displayed on the screen behind her. "The target is here," she began, pointing to the cluster of buildings on the ridgeline. "The hostage is believed to be held in the main structure, likely in a basement or interior room. Guards are estimated at 15 to 20 experienced fighters with heavy weapons. We have drone coverage, but cloud cover is intermittent. Ingress will be via MH-47 Chinooks, inserting at a landing zone 2 clicks south of the compound. You'll move on foot to the objective, assault at dawn, and extract via the same LZ. Total mission time 4 hours. One of the SEALs, a lieutenant named Vega, raised a hand. "What's the backup if the LZ is compromised?" "We have Apache gunships on standby," Natalia replied. "If the primary LZ is unusable, they'll suppress threats while the Chinooks divert to a secondary site 3 clicks east. But that secondary is on the edge of Pakistani airspace. We use it only if absolutely necessary." Vega nodded, satisfied. Rourke asked the harder question. "Ma'am, what's the row if we encounter Pakistani forces?" Natalia's expression didn't change. "Avoid engagement if possible. If fired upon, defend yourselves, but do not pursue across the border. This mission stays on the Afghan side." It was a political tightrope and everyone in the room knew it. Rourke glanced at his men, then back at Natalia. "Understood." The briefing continued, every detail examined, every contingency war-gamed. By the time it ended, the platoon knew the mission inside and out. As they filed out, Rourke lingered. "You're coming on this one?" he asked. Natalia shook her head. "I'll be in the TOC same as always." "Good, we need your eyes." It was a compliment and she accepted it with a nod. The mission launched 30 hours later, the Chinooks lifting off from Bagram airfield under a moonless sky, their massive rotors beating the air, their holds packed with SEALs and gear. Natalia sat in the Tactical Operations Center, surrounded by screens, her headset tuned to the mission frequency. The flight took 90 minutes, the helicopters skimming low over the mountains, their pilots navigating by night vision and GPS. At 0400, they touched down at the LZ, and the SEALs poured out, moving into the darkness with practiced efficiency. Rourke's voice came through the radio, steady and calm. "Boots on ground, moving to objective." Natalia monitored the drone feed, watching the infrared signatures move across the terrain, 16 green blobs navigating ridges and gullies, their pace relentless. The compound came into view 30 minutes later, its buildings dark, its guards visible on the perimeter. Rourke halted his team 500 meters out, using the terrain for cover. "Reaper, I count 6 sentries, 2 on the north side, 2 south, 2 at the main entrance. Recommend we take them simultaneously." Natalia studied the feed. "Concur, you have sniper support." "Affirmative, 2 shooters in position. Execute when ready." The snipers fired within seconds of each other, suppressed rounds dropping 4 of the sentries before the alarm could be raised. The remaining 2 were neutralized by close-range engagements as the platoon stormed the compound. Rourke's team moved like a machine, clearing buildings, securing hostages, eliminating threats. The hostage was found in the basement of the main structure, bound but unharmed. "Jackpot," Rourke reported. "Package secure, moving to extract." But as they exited the compound, gunfire erupted from the ridgeline above. A second group of militants, alerted by the noise, had moved into position and opened up with PKM machine guns. The SEALs took cover, returning fire, but the incoming rounds were relentless. Rourke's voice was tight. "Reaper, we're pinned down. Request immediate air support." Natalia was already on it. "Apache 1-3, this is Reaper. You are cleared, hot on the ridgeline. Coordinates to follow." The Apache gunship rolled in, its 30 cannon tearing into the militant positions, the explosions lighting up the night. The enemy fire slackened, then stopped. "Clear," Rourke reported. "Moving to LZ." The Chinooks were waiting, their rotors spinning, their ramps down. The platoon loaded the hostage and pulled out, the helicopters lifting off as the first light of dawn touched the horizon. By 0600, they were back at Bagram, the mission complete. In the TOC, Natalia allowed herself a moment of relief. Then she began drafting the after-action report. Rourke found her 2 hours later, still at her desk. "Ma'am, the team wanted me to tell you something." She looked up. "What's that, Chief?" "They said you're one of us now." It was the highest honor they could give, and Natalia felt the weight of it. "Thank them for me," she said quietly. Rourke nodded. "Will do, ma'am, will do." The months turned into a year, and Natalia's command of DEVGRU became the standard by which others were measured. She led with precision, with care, with an understanding that every mission carried risk and every operator had a family waiting at home. Her reputation spread beyond naval special warfare, reaching the highest levels of the Pentagon. She was mentioned in conversations about future leadership, about command of carrier strike groups, about positions in the Joint Staff. But Natalia wasn't interested in politics. She was interested in the mission. And as long as there were missions, she would be there, guiding her teams, making the hard calls, ensuring they had what they needed to succeed. The cafeteria incident at Coronado had faded into legend, a story told by junior sailors to illustrate a point that rank and respect weren't always visible, and assumptions could be dangerous. But for Natalia, it was just another moment, another day. Another reminder that the work mattered more than the recognition. She ran her 5 miles every morning. She read her intelligence reports every evening. She led her teams with the same quiet competence that had defined her entire career. And when the next call came, when the next crisis demanded action, she would be ready. Because that's who Reaper was, not the rank, not the call sign, just the work. The call came on a Friday in October, a secure line from the Pentagon. A voice Natalia recognized immediately: Admiral Patricia Vance, the commander of Naval Special Warfare Command. "Natalia, I need you in Washington tomorrow. Something's come up." Natalia didn't ask questions. "What time, ma'am?" 0900, wear your dress blues." The line went dead. Natalia booked a red-eye, packed her uniform, and left Coronado before sunset. The flight was uneventful, the cabin dim, the other passengers asleep. She spent the hours reviewing mission reports on her laptop, her mind focused, her body relaxed. She'd learned long ago how to compartmentalize, to separate worry from action. Whatever the Admiral wanted, she'd find out soon enough. The Pentagon meeting took place in a secure conference room on the 4th floor, a space reserved for high-level briefings. Admiral Vance was there, along with a 2-star general from JSOC, a State Department official Natalia didn't recognize, and a senior CIA analyst. Natalia took her seat, her posture straight, her expression neutral. Vance got straight to the point. "Commander, we have a situation developing in the South China Sea. A Chinese frigate has seized a Taiwanese fishing vessel and is holding the crew hostage. The Taiwanese government has requested our assistance, but this can't be overt. We need a surgical extraction, no fingerprints, no international incident." The JSOC general leaned forward. "DVGRU is the only unit with the capability to pull this off, but it's high risk. If you're caught, the diplomatic fallout will be catastrophic." Natalia absorbed the information, her mind already working through the variables. "What's the timeline?" 72 hours, the CIA analyst said. "After that, the crew will be transferred to a mainland facility, and we lose any chance of getting them out." "What assets do we have in theater?" "A carrier strike group operating near the Philippines. You'll have air support, but it has to stay over international waters. The extraction will be entirely on your team." Natalia nodded slowly. "I'll need detailed intelligence on the frigate layout, crew complement, defensive capabilities, and I'll need confirmation that the Taiwanese crew is still aboard." "You'll have it," Vance said. "But Natalia, I need to be clear. This mission is not just difficult, it's politically explosive. If it goes wrong, there will be consequences at the highest levels. I need to know you're willing to take that risk." Natalia met the Admiral's gaze. "Ma'am, my teams are trained for this. If the intelligence is solid and the mission is feasible, we'll execute." Vance smiled faintly. "I knew you'd say that." The briefing continued for another 2 hours, every detail scrutinized, every question answered. By the time Natalia left the Pentagon, she had a full mission package and a timeline that left no room for error. She flew back to Coronado that night and called Rourke into her office at 0600 the next morning. "Chief, we have a mission. It's classified, it's dangerous, and it's happening in 3 days." Rourke didn't blink. "What do you need?" "Your best operators, a plan for a hostile boarding, and absolute discretion." "You've got it." They spent the next 72 hours in nonstop planning. The Chinese frigate was a Type 54A, a modern warship with sophisticated radar, anti-aircraft systems, and a crew of over 200. The Taiwanese hostages were being held in a compartment below the main deck, guarded by at least 6 armed sailors. The frigate was anchored in contested waters, close enough to Chinese airspace that any misstep could trigger a military response. Rourke's plan was audacious. They would approach via submersible, surface alongside the frigate under cover of darkness, scale the hull, and breach the compartment holding the hostages. The entire operation would take less than 30 minutes. Speed was survival. Natalia reviewed the plan, asking questions, probing for weaknesses, and ultimately approving it. "You'll have drone coverage and signals intelligence support," she told Rourke. "But once you're aboard, you're on your own. No air support. No backup. If things go sideways, your only option is to abort and get out." Rourke nodded. "Understood, ma'am." The mission launched from the USS Ronald Reagan, a Nimitz-class carrier operating 70 miles from the frigate's position. The SEAL team loaded into the submersible at 0100, their faces painted, their weapons ready. Natalia monitored from the carrier's Combat Information Center, her headset tuned to the mission frequency, her eyes fixed on the screens displaying real-time data. The submersible approached the frigate at 0230, surfacing silently alongside the hull. The SEALs climbed magnetic ladders, their movements quick and precise, their suppressed weapons at the ready. Rourke's voice came through the radio, barely above a whisper. "Aboard, moving to breach point." Natalia watched the drone feed, the infrared imagery showing the team moving across the deck, avoiding patrols, descending into the ship's interior. The breach was textbook: explosive charges on the compartment door, a flash of light, then the SEALs pouring in, neutralizing guards, securing hostages. "Package secure," Rourke reported. "All 12 hostages accounted for, moving to extract." But as they exited the compartment, alarms blared. The ship's crew scrambled and the situation exploded into chaos. Rourke's voice was tense. "Contact. Multiple hostiles converging on our position." Natalia's pulse remained steady. "Chief, recommend you move to the port side, use the lifeboats for cover, and extract via fast rope to the water." "Copy." The SEALs fought their way across the deck, their suppressed weapons dropping Chinese sailors who got too close. They reached the lifeboats, fast roped down to the water, and swam to the submersible, the hostages in tow. By 0300 they were clear, the submersible submerging and disappearing into the dark water. The Chinese frigate never knew what hit them. In the Combat Information Center, Natalia exhaled slowly. "Well done, Chief. RTB." The submersible returned to the Reagan, and the Taiwanese hostages were transferred to a neutral vessel for repatriation. The mission was never acknowledged publicly. No press releases, no award ceremonies, just a quiet debrief and a classified report that would remain sealed for decades. But within Naval Special Warfare Command, the story spread. Reaper had done it again. She'd planned an impossible mission, supported her team flawlessly, and brought everyone home. Admiral Vance called her personally the next day. "Natalia, that was extraordinary work. I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Service Medal." Natalia's response was measured. "Thank you, ma'am, but the credit belongs to my team." "I know," Vance said, "but you led them, and that matters." The medal would come months later, pinned to her uniform in a private ceremony attended only by senior leaders. But for Natalia, the real reward was knowing her team had succeeded, that 12 people were alive because of careful planning and flawless execution. By the time the calendar turned to a new year, Natalia had been in command of DEVGRU for 18 months. Her reputation was unassailable, her leadership undisputed. She'd led operations on 4 continents, rescued hostages, captured high-value targets, and mentored a generation of operators who would carry her lessons into the next decade. But she also knew her time in command was finite. The Navy didn't let people stay in one job forever, especially not at her level. Promotions were coming, new assignments, new challenges. She would face them the same way she'd faced everything else, with competence, with humility, and with an unwavering focus on the mission. One morning in late January, she stood on the beach near Coronado, watching the sun rise over the Pacific, the waves rolling in with rhythmic constancy. Her 5-mile run was finished, her breathing steady, her mind clear. She thought about the corporal in the cafeteria, the one who'd shoved her out of line, who'd learned a lesson about assumptions and respect. She wondered if he remembered. She hoped he did. Not because she wanted recognition, but because the lesson mattered. Leadership wasn't about rank or title. It was about earning trust through action, about proving competence through results, about being someone others could rely on when everything was falling apart. That's what her father had taught her. That's what the Navy had reinforced. And that's what she would carry forward, no matter where her career took her next. The sun climbed higher, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and Natalia turned back toward the compound. There were missions to plan, teams to support, challenges to face. And as long as there was work to be done, she would do it. Not for glory, not for recognition, just for the mission, because that's who Reaper was, and that's who she would always be.